So now we have two speakers. So Professor Mattia Thibault and Professor Buruk, I hope I'm pronouncing well, from Tampere University. Mattia Thibault is also a scholar with Turin origins, so we're very happy to listen to him here. So I'll place two chairs for you. Turin origins. Turin background.
Adesso non viene un po' di
Everybody uses templates. Everybody uses
nomadico come nella vita.
Abbiamo avuto paura di non usarlo, ma c'è scritto così duramente. Io mi sono detta, non oserei mai uscire da lì.
Oh no, io lì the screening.
Ma sta andando bene, vero?
Ok.
Il video si vede benissimo e adesso si sentono.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Massimo, for inviting us. We're very happy to be here. We work both at Tampere University in the gamification group. This is also sort of an attempt of interdisciplinary approach to the phases, because I am a semioticist, but
I'm a designer. Yeah, I'm not.
So we've been working on transhumanism and transurbanism for a bit. Also, we'll tell you everything about it, mostly in the context of our Marie Curie projects. I'm involved in a project called Reclaim. It's about how playfulness can be used to reappropriate public spaces.
And I work on a project called Virtual, which looks for how to use wearable devices and how to design wearable devices for virtual and augmented environments. And yeah, so I'll take the word now. So it's, as you see from the title of the presentation, it's about transhuman faces. To understand what transhuman face is, let's talk about transhumanism a little bit. Transhumanism is basically the augmentation of our bodies and minds, and also seen as the next node of evolution by some for the humanity. And in that sense, maybe it's good to adopt Bostrom's classification of how to enhance human body. Is goes through first, for example, augmenting the lifespan. So this is just arbitrary number of 1,122 years, but it can be even infinite, because immortality is one of the things that mentioned in Transhumanist Manifesto. Of course, other than that, there is the sensory modalities that they seek to enhance. For example, a better eyesight, or a better feeling, or better smelling abilities for humans by adapting technologies into our body. Other thing is of course the physical augmentation that can enhance the physical properties, such as strength or our reflexes, let's say, in our daily life. And of course, one of the most important ones is the intellectual capacity, by enhancing our cognitive abilities, such as increased memory or more processing power of understanding things and processing more information at the same time, can be the first things that we can think of. And the last thing we can mention is the mood and self-control, which we can also maybe phrase as emotional abilities. So basically that means to retain more preferable emotions. For example, try to feel less hate but more love by having different kind of, for example, chips in our brains, or maybe in other parts of our body that produces that emotions. Of course, why we're mentioning that, now we will talk about cities, and to understand the future cities, we also understand the future citizens. So when we compare them, yeah, we have human citizens now, but we will have transhuman citizens maybe like 200, 300 years later. So then how cities will also form is a question. In that sense, like with Mattia in our talks about different kind of ideations and design fiction to understand how it can go, we of course talked about smart cities. So there are now a lot of smart city frameworks that also seeks to understand what happens when we take technology and put into the different parts of the city, how it changes how to manage it, how it changes how citizens live in that, and how it changes how we build cities. But our question is, what happens actually when we put transhuman into the city? How they come together? To understand that, actually, we created that Transurban Framework. And in this Transurban Framework, we try to understand how this physical, mental, and emotionally enhanced people can come together with design, management, and social structures of the city. And we have a lot of scenarios for each relation of these keywords, which might be a little bit really long to mention in that presentation. This is why we will try to focus on more about faces. So how Transurban city will recognize face and how it will affect our identity. And I will give the word to Mattia here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Transurban is sort of the framework that we've used to look at the relations between people and their faces and the city. No? So in semiotics we have a lot of analysis about what in normal cities happens, semiotically speaking. So Desserteaux say that there are texts, Barthes called them enunciations. So there is always a form of interpretation going on when we live in the cities, when we move throughout them, when we interpret them. And of course, as Lotman reminds us, cities are not only a product of culture, but they're also a producer of culture. So they are sort of complex semiotic devices that are actualized by our presence in the city. But when we move to the smart city, these cities also acquire a new dimension. This sort of a sensory dimension. Smart cities are full of sensors. Sensors that can look at the quality of the air, at the traffic in the streets, but also sensors that can look at us. They can look at our faces. No? Facial recognition is becoming a very big part of the smart city framework. It's something that has already been implemented, for example, in several Chinese cities, in which facial recognition is becoming a very big and very important technological and therefore social trend. And so the city somehow starts to look at us. And I love this picture. Smart cities are presented as something sexy, something seductive, something that is very appealing to us. But at the same time, there is something a little bit off with the picture. There's something a little bit strange. There is this, idea of surveillance that we cannot really take out of the smart city paradigm. So, if in the normal city, the citizens are actant observers, that with their gaze, of course, they actualize and change and modify the city, being them flaneurs or tourists or whatever. When we go to the smart city becomes a sort of panopticon city, a city that looks at us all the time, everywhere we are, checks what we're doing. And so we're not only actant observers, but we become actant observed. Why actant? Because just the merely being in a certain part of the city is an action. And these sensors that are recording us, that are looking at what we're doing all the time, also record this as an action, as something that we're doing. And being in the wrong place at the wrong moment, participating into a protest or whatever, can be a way in which we will then be prosecuted by the law. So our actions start to be tracked by the panopticon city. And, well, we speak about public spaces, but we wanted to know also this ball by Samsung, which is a sort of camera ball that follows you around your house. And, well, it has a camera, and it continuously looks what's going on also within your private space. So, I mean, it's not necessarily so far when we will have Google Maps of our own apartments. What happens, though, with this panopticon city? Well, not everybody is happy about this, no? These videos become viral about protesters in Hong Kong tearing down the poles with facial recognition devices. Exactly not to be controlled all the time by the government, not to be seen and observed continuously during their activity of protest, but also their daily lives. So if we try to contextualize this in the Transhuman Framework, the Transurban Framework, our question is, okay, so how people can or are already augmenting themselves in order to escape the panopticon city. In order to speak about it, first Oz will tell you something about enclothed cognition.
Yeah, of course, like I'm working on variables, and actually variables has really close connection of being transhuman, and they're kind of our transhuman moods of today, that we're augmenting our bodies by attaching different devices around, and transhumanism manifesto looking to attaching them inside of our body instead of on body. So it is quite related, and what I really want to mention is inclusive cognition is to convey the message that actually what we wear, what we have on our body builds our identity and change how we perceive ourselves. So this was is a psychology test. Let's see if we can hear the voice of that. So is it open? Or even if not, I will try to narrate that one.
Just try this.
There's also a voice.
Alright, so, enclosed cognition. What is it specifically? What was this study James saw? Well, it was a psychological study where they took people and tested them on how well they were able to focus under differing conditions. But interestingly, the variable they were studying was what happens if you hand people a lab coat and then make them solve problems. And they found that wearing a lab coat actually increased people's ability to focus, although it also decreased their lateral problem-solving skills, which is rooted in yet another fascinating study which we should talk about later sometime. Being curious about these results, the researchers started to dig in and test another element of the human psyche, how we understand the clothes we wear. When people would enter the lab, the researchers would tell them that the lab had recently been under construction and that they should wear a coat to protect their clothes. They split the people into two groups and handed them each the same type of coat, but then they told one group that this coat was a doctor's coat, and they told the other group that it was a painter's coat. And they found that only the group which received the, quote, doctor's coat actually had the increased focus, decreased lateral thinking result.
So, that's really like a phenomenal study, especially for people who work on variables, because as researchers, we claim that variables are not just machines and devices that we wear, but they also change how we perceive ourselves, and we try to design accordingly. Especially I work on games. I'm especially interested in that, how they somehow connect us to this imaginary avatars and characters. And in here, of course, there are a lot of interesting work who plays on that notion. For example, this Monarch is a really interesting device which doesn't have kind of a functional use in terms of how we use function in engineering and design. This is more of a self-expression device to change our body measures. For example, while talking, maybe we want to intimidate someone in a conversation, and I press the buttons and our shoulders become bigger. or maybe we want to show our excitement. So this is kind of a variable device that's embedded on bodily expressions and change how we react to world through that augmentations and somehow machine augmented motions that embedded on our bodies. More interesting example is the spider dress, which is already intimidating by its look, but also its function. So it has this proximity sensors on it, and if someone really comes close by, this arms try to catch you and send you away. So this is kind of a fashionable manifestation of saying, like, I mean, you can look because it's also attractive at the same time how it's designed, but you need my consent to come closer. So this is really interesting, because when we say variables, we always think about that creepy glasses, smart glasses that makes people afraid of that they're recorded, or like our Fitbit trackers or smart watches, but actually it's beyond that. It's about our identity. And when it comes to our identity, it's also interesting to see how these variables associated with our faces. And I think we already talked about in these two presentations about how face is associated with the identity, even now is an identification and individualism device. But what happens when we try to rewrite it, and when we try to augment it, and when city actually forces us to do that? So Mattia will talk about that a little bit.
So we have seen how clothing augmentation, of course, influence our self-representation. and also the building of our identity. So what happens when we write our faces? Well, as it has been already mentioned, this is not something new. We augment our faces since a very, very long time. For example, we use makeup or we shape our beards in ways that influence our perception by others and that convey messages, of course. These are practices that have been highly gendered for a while, but also this is sort of changing. Now you can use makeup if you're a man or have a beard if you're a woman, and you're still also conveying some sort of meaning. So there is a lot about how we want to tell ourselves to the world according to how we paint our face. There are more, impactful ways of writing our faces that are generally related to playful practices. So we have cosplay, we have carnival, we have sports supporters, we have Halloween, all occasions in which we temporarily write our faces and rewrite our identities in a playful context. That said, if we have non-temporary writing of our faces, this is something that is often still perceived as antisocial. Face tattoos are becoming sort of a trend, but they're also very efficient in labeling a person as a possible criminal. People with this sort of tattoo don't really land a job very easily. So what happens when we bring facial writing within our panopticon city Transurban Framework? Well, if we think about how facial recognition works, there are three main elements. No? There is the face that is considered as a sort of signifier. There is this sort of pattern, this 3D mold, as Massimo called it, that is stored in the memory of the sensors and that the sensors look for. And then there is, of course, this sort of phatic channel, the connection, this infrared lights that look at faces and sort of scan them. No? So we have seen in this study we made with us that a lot of techniques are emerging in order to disrupt facial recognition. And we sort of categorize them according to which of these three elements they try to disrupt. So the first is what we call side trackers, techniques that try to propose many signifiers, so to sort of complicate the perceptive and interpretative work that the sensors do. And they do that by proposing other faces around your own face. So we have, for example, this Anonymous by Silent X, which is a sort of scarf, a sort of hoodie, that has a lot of faces painted on it, and so confounds the sensor, which one is your face. Now the sensors try to find these patterns, but they find too many. Similarly, the hyperface clothing is a form of printing that you can use for a scarf, you can use for your t-shirt, whatever, but that it makes it hard for the facial recognition technologies to distinguish what is your face and what are actually your clothes. We have then forms of camouflage, of course. I simply try to cover my face so that the city cannot recognize it, I cannot be seen. We have many examples of them. Many of them sort of try to be transparent enough so that other people can still recognize you, but at the same time thwart the image, the digital image that is taken and created by your face by sensors. Others, for example, this pixelated baklava, how is it called? No, this pixelated thing. Huh?
Balaclava.
Balaclava, yeah, exactly.
Baklava is the
Baklava is the sweet.
Baklava.
That's why I'm hungry. So it sort of tried to bring, also metaphorically, the digitization of public space to the forefront. No? As I have to pixelate faces online, now I need to pixelate also my face within the public space because I'm being recorded. Or we have, these are very interesting examples, a wearable face projector that continuously project different faces in movement in your face. There are videos of it online, you can look it up. It's very interesting because you cannot tell which one is the real face. It's very difficult also for human beings to understand. But then we also have attempts to make it fashionable, again, to make it something that people would like to wear, not a weird thing that covers your face, but forms of makeup, for example. So to make stylish the avoidance of facial recognition. So you have makeup, we have also jewels. There is these works from Monarch in which there is a sort of series of jewelry that must be created for your own face, but they are still able somewhat to disrupt the pattern that the machines are looking for. And finally, we have dazzlers. We have devices that sort of stop this infrared light to reach your face. They can do it by, well, creating other infrared light. so that the camera is sort of overloaded and cannot scan your face, or just simply by reflecting them. Not these reflectacles. The idea is exactly that while infrared can sort of see you behind your glasses, if the glasses perfectly reflect infrared lights, then you're not perceivable anymore. And again, we see a sort of a fashionable attempt of making these objects not necessarily, statements about surveillance, but daily life objects, things that we can bring with us and that, again, modify our self-perception, the construction of our identity, but in the end modify also the identity of the city itself, because everybody is going around with reflectacles. Of course, our interpretation of what was going on in this space is different. However, what might happen is that this leads to a sort of escalation. So we augment ourselves to escape the technology of the smart city, but also the smart city will adapt to our transhuman technologies. And that's when it will become a transurban panopticon city. So that it sort of take in account our augmentations in order to win in this sort of race for identity. And as a sort of conclusion, we like to show this image that is from a movie called Alita Battle Angel, because we find very interesting that if we look at cyberpunk literature and cinema, the face is the only thing we don't change. No? When all our body is made of metal and machine, the face is still what tells me who I am. It's still what sort of keeps my human identity alive. But apparently our faces are the first thing we're ready to augment right now, exactly to escape facial recognition. And what will that do to our self-identification?
And yeah, I mean, we can of course imagine a lot of ways that cities will track us and detect us in the future with all the chips that in our bodies. But I think we will also find ways to trick that things by hacking our bodies. But apparently faces will be one of them, one of the things that will recognize us. And it looks like that we will start changing it. Or, I don't know, will we change it and lose our identity altogether? Or we will be obsessed by identity on our face and only keep it while changing the whole of our body? Is the question that I think leave hanging in the air today in our presentation. So, thank you for listening to us.
Thank you very much for this wonderful